So it's not simple to determine these parameters, which are the pure time preference, the marginal utility of capital, and economic growth levels, and they can vary from one society to the other. So broadly, there are several alternatives approach to adopt for the selection of discount rates. We'll go over them now. So the first one is the prescriptive approach, denoting the social rate of time preference (SRTP) approach. We have the descriptive approach, denoting the use of capital return for discounting that apply a pure rate of time preference of 3% or more. And we have the hyperbolic discounting. So to start with, let us talk about the descriptive view on discounting. So advocates of the descriptive approach claim that mitigation expenditure displace other forms of investment, and thereby they claim that decision makers ought to make decisions that will increase the total consumption. So, if return on mitigation investment lies below that of other investments, then choosing other investments would make current and future generation better off. This is why the descriptive approach advocates the inferring of the social discount rate directly from current rates of return and growth rates. And in this case, the discount rate used under the descriptive approach is usually larger than 3 to 4%. On the other hand, in case of prescriptive approach, decisions on discount rates should be derived from ethical considerations, reflecting society's views concerning trade-offs consumption across generations. Commonly, the prescriptive view indicates an effective discount rate of 2 to 3%, constituted of an almost zero pure time preference, 1 to 2% consumption growth, and an elasticity of marginal utility of 1.5, as calculated via the Ramsey formula. Now we can see here, depending on several sources, some estimates on the social discount rate. Of course, as expected, you don't have one possible value because, as we said, it's a subjective estimation that is affected by several factors, and we can sometimes parameters can change from one perspective to the other. That's why you can come up with different discount rates. And as usual, as we discussed together, in general, we consider like a sensitivity analysis. Yani we can talk about a range of discount rates, and we try several possible discount rates to see their effect on the project. Now, a widely used method to consider discount rates value is the hyperbolic discounting. And to give an example of this, we know that the preference of people can change with time. So for example, maybe if you are asking today, if you want to decide today, what would you choose, fruit or chocolate for next week? So maybe today you will say, no, I will just eat what is, let's say, I need to eat chocolate because I like a chocolate. But if you want to decide from now to 1 week what you will eat, you say, no, I will eat fruit because it's more healthy. So the preference of people will be affected a lot by the time. So as we said, maybe today's subjects will typically choose fruit for next week. Okay, while if you ask them after 1 week and directly what they want to select, they will say, no, we prefer maybe to eat a chocolate now. Okay, so this idea is just to tell you that the percentage, or if you want, the preference of people is affected a lot by time. So in general, when we ask them to now decide, they will decide what will satisfy them more, what they like more. But maybe if the time is far away, they will opt for the good decision, for healthy decision. So that's why we say that we can talk about declining discount rates or hyperbolic discounting. So the third approach to discounting tries to better cater for all the uncertainties involved, particularly when valuing the far off future. In specific, the science and economic implications of climate change are not perfectly certain, especially as they are compounded by long time horizons. So there are uncertainties with respect to technological progress, economic growth rate, and so forth. In other words, uncertainty about future rates provides a strong generic rationale for using certainty equivalent social interest rates that decline over time from around today's observable market values down to the smallest imaginable rates for the distant future. In general, exponential discounting has been widely used in economics, and a large body of evidence suggests that it does not explain in a good way people's choice. For example, people choose as if they discount future rewards at a greater rate when the delay occurs sooner in time. So, what we mean by this, for example, if we ask you, do you prefer to get $100 now or $110 in a day? This is the first option. In this case, maybe you will say, no, I prefer $100 today. But if you ask them, do you prefer $100 in 30 days or $110 in 31 days? Then 1 day will not have a big influence if you talk about 30 days. So, okay, maybe they will tell you, okay, no, it's better to take $110 in 31 days because the variation, which is 1 day, is really small compared to the future time, because after 30 days we are talking, so 1 day is not making such difference, while if we talk about now, 1 day will make a difference. So many people will prefer $100 now to $110 tomorrow, but fewer will prefer $100 in 30 days to $110 in 31 days. So this is why, in a more general case, the rate at which people discount future rewards declines as the length of the delay will increase. This phenomena has been termed as hyperbolic discounting. So the discount rate is a variable rate with time, and it will not be a constant rate. So after doing all of this, then the remaining parts are very similar, if you want, to the procedure in case of financial analysis. So in the sixth step, we should compute the net present value of each alternative. So the sixth step in CBA will be to compute the net present value of each alternative under consideration. The net present value of an alternative equals the difference between the present value of the benefits and the present value of the costs. And you are already familiar with this equation. Just to remind you, you have I will represent the initial investment cost, or here they consider, if you want, R is the net income. Okay, so R is the annual net revenue, which take into consideration income minus costs. Uh, the discount rate is R, and T is the time frame involved, the number of years. In essence, the NPV above entails that costs in each year are deducted from benefits of that year, as we did together previously, including environmental and or non-market valued ones. What is different in CBA, as we mentioned, so we should consider every cost and income related to society as a whole, not on the individual level. So this will include also environmental and or non-market valued ones, which are related to the human being, discounted all by the discount factor 1 plus r to the power minus t to the net present terms NPV, and we'll do the summation in order to find the value NPV for at any time t. Now, in order to decide on the best approach or the best alternative, we should perform a sensitivity analysis. So, sensitivity analysis will measure how sensitive the result of a cost benefit analysis is to a change in one of the variables, which could be approached either by variable to variable. Okay, يعني I will take variable by variable change. But in majority of cases, you have several variables that are connected to each other that will affect each other. So we can do what we call a scenario approach, which treats variables in groups, particularly when there is interdependency between these variables. And of course, okay, for any project, program, policy being evaluated, in order to decide if we go ahead with the project or not, of course, the NPV should be positive. And we have seen it's not enough to have positive NPV. We should gain a considerable amount to say that the project is worth of investigating in it. So if you are comparing between several alternatives, then you should select the alternative with the highest NPV. And of course, as mentioned, yani per unit of investment. So we should always keep in mind that CBA is only a tool to aid the decision making and not to make decisions. Because as we discussed at the beginning of the session, ethics, standards, and the regulations are really very important. And sometimes you have a lot of things that cannot be monetized, and the ethical aspect is much more important than the economical one. Now, CBA is criticized for several reasons. To start with, we can't reduce complex social decisions to just a list of its costs and benefits. So, as we discussed in the example at the beginning, not all benefits and costs can or should be measured in terms of money. It is inappropriate to value someone's life by money. We should also, in addition, CBA will neglect equity issues by accepting existing distribution of income and property rights. Furthermore, it will ignore irreversibility in environmental choices. So sometimes you know that when you use resources, you can have depletion of resources, you can have bad effect on the environment, and these what will happen is irreversible, so we cannot change it anymore. So we should pay attention that we are not harming the environment, and we are not causing real big damage for while doing our project. So as a final thought, CBA is a powerful tool that brings the pro and cons of some policy, program, or project into a common denominator. CBA integrates scientific, social, and economic information into a consistent framework for evaluating policy. Again, it should be a decision assisting tool, but not a decision making tool. Last but not least, we must always realize that not everything under the sun can be monetized, especially when it comes to ethical issues. So this was the lecture about CBA. Now we'll start with another lecture on the levelized cost of electricity. So in this chapter, okay, we'll see how to come up with new factors that can help us into comparing several technologies. So we'll go over cost-effective analysis and the levelized cost of electricity of electric energy technologies. To start with, CEA is a widely used alternative to CBA, especially when analysts face constraint on applying a full CBA. And as we have discussed now, one of the main problems of CBA is that it cannot take factors that cannot be computed by money, such as number of lives saved, such as, let's say, the probability of higher accidents number, etc. So analysts may be unwilling or unable to monetize the most important policy impact, or clients may not wish for a monetization, especially, let's say, number of lives saved, for example, is a very important criteria, but we cannot monetize it. Okay, so we cannot say this amount of money is equivalent to a certain number of lives. In using CBA, analysts face the burden of monetizing all impacts, yet may leave some benefits unmonetized. However, if CEA measure captures most of the benefits, then it may be reasonable to use CEA to avoid burden of CBA. What we mean here that one of the most challenging aspects of the cost benefit analysis is to account for different costs and benefits and to try to give them some monetary values, okay? And sometimes this is challenging because you should estimate what is the value in money of such issues. And in many cases also you have a lot of benefits that you cannot describe by money. Okay, that's why we need to come up with another approach that can take into consideration factors that have no equivalence in money terms. So the cost effectiveness analysis will involve computing cost effectiveness ratios and using these ratios to choose policies that promote efficiency. In general, two metrics will be involved. First, costs are measured in dollars or other monetary unit or currency, while effectiveness may be measured, for example, depending on the case, in units such as life saves, the tons of carbon dioxide reduction, the number of children vaccinated, etc., depending on the applications that you have. For example, if we want to go back to the example we talked about the Ford cars, okay? We said that if we just do the CBA, we will decide to not fix the design. But if we use the CEA and we divide then the cost by the number of deaths, of course, we'll consider the option which will include smaller number of deaths, okay? So in this way, we can take into consideration the importance of aspects that do not have equivalence in mind. So therefore, here we can have two ratios, or we calculate the cost effectiveness ratio, which is computed by dividing the costs of an alternative by the measure of its effectiveness, which is the most widely used ratio, or we can take the inverse, which is the effectiveness cost ratio, which is computed by dividing the effectiveness measure of an alternatives by its cost. Now, what is the LCOE? The LCOE is the levelized cost of electricity, and it is the expected ratio of total life cycle cost of a project to the total units of electricity generated over the lifetime, both expressed in terms of their present value equivalent. So this is a very important strategy to compare different ways of production of electricity. You know that electricity can be produced using fuel, can be produced using nuclear energy, can be produced using renewable energy, and in renewable we can talk about solar, we can talk about wind, we can talk about hydropower, and these approaches are really very different. So how can we compare them? In order to be able to compare them, so what we will do is we'll calculate on the economical level for each of them the net present value, and we'll divide by, okay, the units of electricity produced. So per, let's say, kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, etc. So LCOE is used by investors, researchers, and governments to compare technologies relying on different physical principles, using different fuels, and which can have dissimilar economic plant lifetimes. So also, as we discussed before, one of the most challenging issues is to compare things of different lifetime. That's why it will be good to normalize, if you want. We talked about of considering the CAR, and here another way to normalize is to divide by the amount of generation. So the LCOE has been designed with the idea of allowing for comparison between energy sources on a unit cost basis over the lifetime of different energy technologies projects. Now, to calculate the LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, we need to estimate the initial investment cost I0, other costs AT that occur in a specific year T, the lifetime of the project, and the amount of electricity that is expected to be produced in year T. Finally, a discount rate I needs to be estimated. So if we explore a little bit together this formula. So in order to get the levelized cost of electricity, and the unit will be a money currency unit, which can be euro, dollars, etc., per unit of generation, in, let's say, in energy. So here megawatt hour, it can be kilowatt hour, it can be joule, etc. Okay, but in general we use megawatt hour or TOE, as we'll see after, because we have large amount of electricity generation. So to calculate the LCOE, first we should compute, as we mentioned, the net present value, which is composed of, we know we have, of course, the initial investment. And of course, we account for it. So here, when we talk about life cycle cost, so we are just considering the costs. We are not considering the revenue. Why? Because we'll divide, now we are dividing the costs, if you want, by the output. We are dividing the input we put over the output. So we don't subtract them here. So pay attention here. We just add the annual costs. And because we should consider time effect, so we need to do summation for T going from 1 to N of the annual expected cost. And as usual, in this cost, of course, we'll consider operational costs, maintenance cost, etc. Okay. Over 1 plus I to the power T. I is the discount rate, as we know, and T is a number of years we reached, over summation from 1 to N of the output for each year, which is calculated in here in megawatt hour and per year, and we divide by 1 plus I to the power T. So it is the annual electricity generation expected for year T. Now, whenever we do this ratio, this will allow us to compare, if you want, sources of electricity that are very different lifetimes, different resources. We can compare renewable versus other technologies. We can compare renewable energy to methods using fossil fuels. We can compare also among renewable energies several strategies, which is better: solar, wind, hydropower, etc. So this, by doing the levelized cost, we simplified a lot the comparison, because we have a lot of difference in parameters. Any question on this? Okay. So for example, okay, let us consider a comparison on capital costs of main electricity generating technologies as summarized in the following graph. So in some instances, the capital costs of renewable energy generation technologies have converged with those of certain conventional generation technologies, which, coupled with improvement in operational efficiency for renewable energy technologies, which have led to a convergence in levelized cost of electricity between the respective technologies. If you remember, in the introduction to this course, we have observed the trend of variation of cost, okay, when using renewable energy. And we have seen, especially for case of solar and wind, a huge decrease with time because of the technological advancement and of the incentives given by governments. Okay, so for this reason, we were able recently in current years to have competition between renewable energy sources and conventional ones. So here, for example, if we compare the LCOE for different renewable energy strategies and conventional one, okay, you can see here, for example, the capital cost in dollar per kilowatt for the case of solar PV rooftop residential. So it's between, let's say, 2,475 and 2,850. It's relatively high compared to other techniques. That's why we have high preference to go to solar PV community and more also to solar PV crystalline utility scale, for which we have really a high reduction in LCOE. While, as you can see, using solar thermal tower with storage and geothermal is still very expensive. And we have always researched to try to reduce this cost in order to make it a viable option. While for wind, already the LCOE is competitive with conventional methods. So we can see here from this graph that solar PV crystalline utility scale and thin film utility scale, in addition to wind, are the most competitive, and they are close to conventional techniques. And if we compare with gas peaking, for which the LCOE is between 700 and 925, nuclear is still very expensive. In addition to coal, also it's relatively expensive. So in conventional techniques, the most used one are gas peaking and gas combined cycle. Okay, so of course also we have fossil fuels. It's not illustrated here, but it is one of the widely used methods. So now whenever we perform the life level, when we want to calculate the levelized cost of electricity, we need to, as we mentioned, to identify the different costs. So annual costs are made up of operation, maintenance costs that can be fixed or variable, fuel costs when applicable, yani because sometimes you need to, especially in power plants, okay, generating electricity, the majority of them rely on burning fossil fuel, burning fuel to produce heat, and this heat will be needed to operate the power cycle. On the other hand, in case we use renewable energy, we don't rely, and we can go up to zero, go down to zero consumption of fuel in case we don't need a backup system if the renewable energy system is completely independent. So here we can see, for example, for the case of solar PV, how we can account for different costs, including, let's say, the total capital cost, the fixed operation and maintenance cost, the variable ones, the capacity, whenever we want to other issues to take into consideration, as we'll discuss after. What is the capacity factor? What is the construction time, the facility life, in order to know and in total what will be the levelized cost of energy. Another example here is for different other techniques like solar thermal tower with storage, fuel cell, geothermal, wind onshore, and wind offshore. So as you can see, these tables can allow you to perform comparison between very different strategies, and from the final result of levelized cost of energy, you can make your decision. Here we have the other options of gas peaking, nuclear, coal, and gas combined cycles, with all details of different costs involved. Now, fossil fuels, we know that fossil fuels is one of the widely used strategies for production of electricity. The energy content of a fossil fuel before any treatment or conversion corresponds to primary energy. A fuel is characterized giving the common feature inherent to its heat energy generation by the calorific value. Calorific value, which is the gross calorific value or net calorific value, is the quantity of heat released by the complete combustion of a unit quantity of a fuel in a well-determined condition. Its calculation may or not take into account the vapor condensation of the water. You know that when you perform calculation, part of this heat will be lost because of the amount of heat required to cause evaporation of water that is present inside of the fuel. So we should take into consideration this to determine the net amount that we can extract. Now, concerning the generation efficiency, the electric power plant efficiency is defined as the ratio between useful electricity output from the generating unit in a specific time unit and the energy value of the energy source supplied to the unit within the same time. Example. So, as we discussed before, one of the used units for generation of electricity is ton of equivalent oil. Okay, and this is equivalent to 11,628 kilowatt hour in net calorific value. The useful electricity output from a power station in a time unit can be calculated here. It's given in this problem as supplied electricity equal to 1 TOE. For 1 TOE, then we have the total output is 4,505 kilowatt hour. Because we know that it's impossible to profit from 100% from the provided heat. So you know that from thermodynamics, whenever you have a power plant, you always have losses. You cannot convert 100% heat into work. And that's why the efficiency of a power plant system is always smaller than 100%. So Q dot N is the amount of heat you will provide to your power plant by burning fuel. And by studying your cycle, okay, and you know how to compare it, for example, with Carnot cycle to assess the maximum efficiency, you can find what is the maximum efficiency you can have. And here they gave us what is the amount of work produced, which is here in electrical work. So if we have an input of 1 TOE, which correspond to 11,628 kilowatt hour, we can only produce an electrical work of 4,505 kilowatt hour. So the thermoelectric power plant efficiency can be computed then as the useful output, which is the electrical output supplied, over the input, which is the heat that we can get from burning, let's say, fuel. So this will allow us to find the efficiency of our system. Here we can compare in this table thermal efficiencies of several power plants. So for example, a steam turbine fuel oil power plant has typical efficiencies between 38 and 44. A steam turbine coal-fired power plant between 39 and 47. Large gas turbines up to 39. Large gas-fired combined cycle gas turbine power plant up to 58. Why here we have very high efficiency compared to the others? Because as the name indicates, it's combined cycle gas turbine power plant. We are combining two cycles in order to enhance the efficiency. You know that in general, because as I told you, it's impossible to convert heat completely into work. So let us consider a certain cycle, okay? If you take the cycle of the gas turbine, you are giving heat to the cycle, you are producing a certain amount of work, and because energy is conserved, one part of heat will be rejected. And if you don't use this heat, then you will lose it. So what we do here is the process of heat recovery. The heat recovery process will consist of the following. After rejection of heat, I will use it, okay, to operate another cycle. So Q dot out of my gas turbine, okay, will be the heat input to another cycle. Typically, it's a steam cycle, okay, and this will allow me to use the rejected heat in an efficient way, and this will lead to increase in my efficiency. Now, concerning biomass and biogas, the efficiency is between 30 and 40%. For waste to electricity power plant is between 22 and 28. And for nuclear power plant is 33 to 36. You can see that nuclear energy has relatively low efficiency and high levelized cost of electricity. And using it is just political, if you want, because it will give power to countries who use nuclear energy. They go for it, not because of economical reasons. And geothermal also is until now not very efficient, just 15%, plus its cost is really high. Therefore, we are still researching to enhance the performance of geothermal technologies. So if we compare, for example, in Lebanon, generation efficiency for different power plant in Zouk, Jiyeh, Dar Amar, Zahrani, etc., we can see that the most efficient power plants are in Dar Amar and Zahrani are combined cycle gas turbines, which are using diesel oil. And we know that diesel oil have a burning diesel oil will have a negative impact on the environment. That's why we need to go to new alternatives. We need to try to use renewable energy in order to avoid this high amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the cost of fuel can be non-existent in case we use renewable energy technology. However, resource availability is a key component, and you know that renewable energy is not available all times, and in general, we need always to have a backup for it. That's which make it a little bit challenging because you need to use several systems at the same time. The cost of fuel represents a large portion of the cost per unit of energy generated for fossil-based power plants. Fossil fuel power plants have lifetimes ranging from 25 to 40 years, and therefore predicting the price of fuel becomes no less than impossible. And it's very challenging to predict how the fluctuations in price of fuel, because you know that it's affected by politics, it's affected by the shortage in reserves. So you have a lot of parameters which will dictate the price of fuel, and it's very hard to compute them and decide on a certain discount rate or such issues. The price of fuel are determined by several factors that are independent and are in themselves uncertain. For example, economic growth or collapse, which impact oil demand, political events and supply, and let's say unexpected issues like coronavirus spread. So all of these will affect the cost of fossil fuel. So the only way to include fuel prices in levelized costs of technology is really to take several scenarios and therefore have a range of eventual costs of per kilowatt hour. So this is why, because sometimes we are uncertain, we don't take one value, we conduct a parametric study, we conduct a sensitivity analysis to see how the price of fuel can affect our results. Now, the final parameter to be discussed will be in the levelized cost of energy is the energy output. Again, things will differ from fossil-based power plant and renewable energy. Before we explain this, okay, you know, just here you can have some conversion factors. So if they give you, let's say, the performance, for example, of an equipment using electricity like a lamp, 60 watt light bulb, for any amount of operation, you can find the consumption by just multiplying the power by the hour of consumption. Similarly, for generation, you multiply the power of generation by the number of operation. Okay, so this is very simple. I know you know it. Just to as a reminder for you. So you can compute then the amount